Hi there and welcome to this tutorial video for Motion Symphony 2.0. This tutorial series is intended to be a replacement for the old Motion Symphony tutorials, as quite a lot of things have changed for Motion Symphony 2.0. So I like to redo everything and go through all of that stuff there. So here we are in the example project. Now this example project is available. The links for this are on the marketplace page. I highly recommend downloading this and giving it a try. You will need to obviously install the plugin separately. That's not included for obvious reasons. This has a decent setup for a root motion character, and more is going to be added later. And there's a bit of information on the walls there. But you can look at the blueprints and see what I've done. It's really handy to see generally how it's done as an example. Now, the second port of call also for support is the documentation, and I'd actually say this is the first port of call. I've spent a lot of effort going through this, and I can't stress this enough. Read this documentation, even if you don't have a problem, because to use motion matching, you need to understand it. It's not a system that you can really get the most of without understanding. And this documentation isn't just a how-to of setup. It goes into detail on how motion matching works. And as I said, that is vital. So please, always check the documentation. There's only one of me. There are literally thousands of you. So it's hard to repeat myself answering the same questions that are already answered in the documentation. So please have a look at this. If you are upgrading from Motion Symphony 1 to Motion Symphony 2, there's a whole section on this and what you need to change and why you should upgrade. But I won't go much further on that. If there is anything you take away from this video, please use the documentation. And the third thing is, before we jump into things, is to join the support Discord if you want support. That is the only place that I provide support. Because it's just not manageable to provide it at different places. So please, if you want direct support from myself or the community, please join that Discord. And yeah, that is linked on the marketplace page. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get straight into it and start creating things from scratch. Here's a new folder. I'm going to call it tutorial. We're going to put everything for this tutorial in here. Let's start by creating an animation blueprint. I'm going to use the standard UE5 skeleton, and I'm going to call this ABP tutorial, tutorial. Okay, let's open this up, and let's do the most basic thing possible. I'm not going to make a state machine. I'm just going to right click and choose motion matching. Actually came up before. Why? Space, there we go, motion matching, and create a motion matching node. Now this is the flagship node for Motion Symphony, and basically all it does is output a pose. So I want you to think of this node as no different from a sequence player or a blend space player. It takes an animation asset, in this case a motion data, and it outputs a pose. As far as the rest of the graph goes, it doesn't care what this motion matching does. It just outputs a pose and puts it through to the next node. So please understand that motion matching and every node really from Motion Symphony is a tool that goes into your animation blueprint. It is not an animation system that you can just plug in and use. It's not a template. So I often get questions like, oh, how do I do turn in place? Well, you don't use Motion Symphony for turn in place. Turn in place is something you would not use motion matching for. So how do I do this? How do I do that? If it's not about this node or one of the pose matching nodes, it's really not Motion Symphony. Please keep in mind, these are tools in a toolbox for your animation system, not an animation system itself. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, we've got our motion matching node, and it's capable of doing your entire locomotion, really. You're not going to have it like this with just the single node in a full project, but we're going to start like this just to keep things simple. Okay, so you'll see I get an error because this is not set up properly. I'm going to drag out this input data and promote it to a variable. Now what is this? This is the data that controls the character's motion. So this is the user input. It gets converted into a predicted trajectory, and then it gets put into here. Now we're going to do all that code in the event graph soon, but we're just going to promote it to a variable for now. I'm going to rename this to input data. just like so. We also need a motion data asset. Now you could just set it directly on the node or in here. I'm going to actually drag this off and promote it to a variable as well. And this will allow us to override the animation blueprint later. Let's rename this to motion data. Actually, I'll just make it locomotion. Motion data. Because we might have different nodes with different motion data. All right. Now the user calibration, we don't really need this. This is more advanced stuff. We'll come to that later. So I'm going to just hide that. And the search quality, let's also not worry about that for now. We'll just leave it on performance mode, which is the original mode. And let's hide that as well. So we've got these two things. Now we're still getting an error because we haven't really set our motion data. Well, we're not getting an error now, but it is going to have a null motion data. So we do need to create that now. So let's just save this and let's create our motion data. Now to make a motion data, we need something first. We need a motion match config. So let's actually make this first and then we'll make a motion data. So I'm going to call this tutorial config. And it's telling me that I need to set its skeleton, otherwise it won't work. So we'll open this up. We don't need a full editor for it. We can just do this. And I'm going to choose the SK mannequin. You can look up in the documentation what each of these things do. I'm not going to clog up the tutorial going through every single setting, just the basics. So with the mannequin, the default settings are fine. If you have a model with different axes, you're going to have to play with these. Okay, so the important thing we want to look at here is input response features and pose quality features. Now the input response features is the trajectory in this case. That's the most basic input response feature. And that is what is going to be injected with our input data. Now, if you don't understand what's going on, again, I highly recommend go over here, click on this one, particularly understanding motion matching, and read through all this, and it's going to start making a lot more sense. I've also got a video on how motion matching works. You don't need any Unreal knowledge for that. That's just a pure theory video. Please do watch that. I'll link that in the description. Okay, so let's start with a basic setup. I'm going to add the first feature and I'm going to make it a trajectory 2D. And in this trajectory, we are going to leave the default settings for weights, and we're going to add 3 trajectory points under trajectory timing. One is going to be 0.5 seconds in the past. One is going to be 0.5 seconds in the future, and the next one is going to be 1 second in the future. So our trajectory is going to record 1 point in the past and 2 points in the future with these timings. It is vital that these are in order from lowest to highest, so please keep that in mind. We can play with the weights later. I'm actually going to set this default directional weight to 1. And the only other thing I will do here is click normalize weights by quantity. This is something you do want to check if you're making a new motion config. If you've got an existing one and you're upgrading to UE5, you don't check this, otherwise you're going to have to recalibrate things. We'll leave that. Let's go to our pose now. So if the input response controls how our character moves, the pose quality features is what makes it move in a way that is smooth and doesn't just jump between random animations. So I'm going to do a standard setup here. Let's add in a body momentum 2D. So this is the velocity of the whole character. It's going to match that. And that, I call it body momentum 2D because it preserves momentum. That's the effect it has. I'm going to do a body momentum rot. This is the rotation momentum, so the yaw angular velocity. It's going to match that. Now we don't need to really set any features. We can leave the default weights for now. I want to show you what happens when you leave all the default weights, and then we'll come back and add more weightings to it to make things better. It'll help you understand a bit better. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add a direction. Sorry, it is a facing, bone facing. So we're going to match a bone facing, and in this case, I'm going to choose the hips. So if we drop these down, we'll start with X facing. I think that is incorrect. I think it might be Y, but we'll see in the debugging drawing soon, which is correct. So let's go and choose the pelvis, not the root, the pelvis. So we're going to match the facing direction of the pelvis. This helps with any sort of movement that you have with that has hip twisting. And we will add a match feature. This is bone location. Oh, it's already there. And we will get the top of the spine, so just to keep that upper body stabilized. And the last two features are going to be bone location and velocity. It's going to match the bone location and velocity of the feet. Now these are probably the most important ones because this is how it keeps the cycles of your running and walking matched nicely. So let's go left foot, so foot left and foot right. Okay. So that is all set up with the default weights. We're not going to touch it. We're going to keep the quality versus responsive ratio as 0.5. And so these are the features that are going to match. It's going to match the trajectory for input response, and then to make sure that the animation is smooth, it's going to match all of these things about the character's pose. So we can now save this and close it, and we can go to and create a motion data now. So let's call this locomotion motion data. Wait, I want to actually call it, not edit yet. I want to call this tutorial motion data. And we'll open that up. First thing we need to do is set our tutorial config. We'll set that and hit save. A character should show up, but if it doesn't, for whatever reason, just close this and reopen it. And there we go, there's our character. First thing we need to do here is start adding sequences. So let's click on pick animations, and I'm going to grab a whole bunch of mocap animations. Now these animations are available if you download the example project. I recorded them myself with mocap. Mocap is generally the best for motion matching, and if you want to understand why, there's, well, the documentation will explain it. Basically, you want continuous clips of animation. You don't want them to end abruptly. In like short clips are harder to deal with, and then you also want a lot of animation. Basically, you want a high amount of coverage, but we'll get more into that later. There are some tools built in to help with cut clips, but generally, if you can do mocap, then try to do mocap. Okay, so let's add in all of these. I'm just going to add the running for now. Yep, this looks all correct. I'm not going to take the cycle neutral because I've already got run loop neutral, and I'm going to add these. Now these will all come into the sequences section. We can add composites and blend spaces as well, but I'm not going to get into that. That's for a later tutorial. All right, so if we click on any of these, we can see the preview, and we can also preview the whole animation in its entirety. You do have to have root motion turned on for these animations to work with Motion Symphony. It doesn't mean you must use a root motion at runtime, but the animations must have root motion, otherwise it cannot figure out what the trajectory is. Now I'm going to leave all the default settings, and I'm going to hit pre-process. And it's going to pre-process, it's pretty quick. And if we click on one of these, we can see a bit more data. I'm just going to get rid of, let's go to our, let's try turn stop. Okay, I'm going to click show and hide the trajectory there. Now we can see all the data that was from our pose before that we set up in the config. This red line is the trajectory. We can see we've got 3 points as we specified. 1 is in the past and 2 are in the future. So this is the 0.5 and this is the 1. Let's open our config just as a reminder. Okay. Here are the trajectory points, the 3 we had, negative 0.5, 0.5, and 1. That's the red line there. And that seems to be doing fine as we get to the corner. It, you can see it turns, and each trajectory point has a facing as well. So this is a good way to make sure that your data is correct and that your config is correct. There is something wrong, and we're going to fix it soon though. I will just go through everything else first. Let's have a look at this green one. Now this is the bone facing that we chose, and you can see that it's facing up. We don't want this, we actually want the forward vector. So let's play with this until we get the right one. I think it's Y. Let's hit save and pre-process again. There we go. Now it's pointing in the correct direction. Right, our motion data looks pretty good now. We were matching the bone location of the upper spine, so that looks fine. And we were matching the velocity and the location of the left and right foot, and we can see that here. This is the location of the foot, and that vector is the velocity. And if we play it, we can see it updating like that. You'll notice that the resolution of the pose data is not the same resolution as the animation. You can see it like it only updates every certain amount of frames. This is intended. Just because the animation keeps going and those balls stay in the same place is not a bug. Now we can increase this resolution a little bit more, and I'm going to do that over here. Pose interval. I'm going to set it to 0.05. This is generally what I like. Once you set that though, you are going to have to pre-process again. You might have to refresh it. There we go. Now it should be a little bit more granular, but you don't need it to be the same frame rate as the animation. I would always keep this at 0.05. So yeah, that looks like it's working correctly. This purple circle here, that is the rotation velocity. You can see as we get to the corner and we turn, you see that arrow coming off. That means that we're rotating to the right here, and which is accurate from the animation. And this orange here is the body velocity, the body momentum 2D that we were tracking. So it looks like everything is pre-processing correctly in our animations. You can go through and check them all. If something ever seems funny, it's a good idea to come and check this, because sometimes your animation can be incorrectly pre-processing. Here, I'll show you an example. So here is a looping animation. Now I've set this animation to loop in the settings, and therefore it is automatically ticked loop here. You can see the other ones do not automatically have that ticked. Now I'm just going to uncheck it for a demonstration. If I hit pre-process, now watch what happens to the trajectory. So we're already running, it's a loop, but we don't have any past trajectory because this is where the animation ends. It doesn't have the information it needs to pre-process behind. Now watch what happens when we get to the end of the animation. The trajectory stops because the system doesn't know how to get that information. Now obviously setting loop and hitting pre-process will fix that, because it knows that it loops, so it can just loop the animation to figure out the past and the future. So that's that fixed. But say that, for example, this isn't meant to be a looped animation. There are other ways we can do this. We can go to future trajectory here and say extrapolate and past. And we'll hit pre-process again. And you'll see, even though we don't have it set to loop, it's done a pretty good job at predicting or extrapolating the velocity, and same for the end of the animation. It's not quite perfect. It's moved off a little to the side, but it's still better than the trajectory just coming to an end. However, this of course is a looping animation, so we're going to turn these off and go to loop. You can also steal the animation from other motions. We'll get into that later when we look at a cut clip setup. Okay, so it looks like all our motion data is looking pretty good. Let's just plug this in raw and dirty and put it into here and use our tutorial motion data, compile, save. It's going to keep playing random animations because we don't actually even have an idle in this, but that's fine. We will deal with the idle in a second. Now, before we go any further, we're going to have to set up a character, because to generate the trajectory, we need a trajectory generator, which takes our user input. So let's go over here and create a new blueprint class. This will be a character, and I'm going to choose just character, and we'll call this BP tutorial character. I'll open this up, and I'm going to add the mannequin to the mesh. So let's just do Quinn. SKM Quinn, and we'll move that down. I believe -90 is about right. That'll do. Okay, and we can choose the animation blueprint over here, and we'll do tutorial. There we go. And she's using that blueprint now. Now we need to set up a few things. We need to add a component here, trajectory generator. And there's our component. We need to set the motion match config that we are using with our motion matching. So tutorial config here. And that is all we should need to do to get that started. Let me just double check. We can just start with the base settings. That's fine. We will have to adjust it later. Okay, so let's create a new blueprint class, and we're going to use a player controller. Let's call this BP tutorial player controller, because of course we need to use inputs and stuff to control our character. I'll drag this over here so you can see it, and we're going to hit save. I'm going to go to the event graph, and the first thing I need is on possess, because when we possess the character, that's how we know what we're controlling. I'm going to cache this variable. Yeah, you can get controlled pawn and all that stuff, but I don't want to do that. I want to just take it. Let's rename and cache it. This actually no, sorry, that is incorrect. I want to cast it. Cast to BP tutorial character, and then we'll promote it to a variable. And I'm going to call this rename possessed character. Okay, so now we've got our character that is cached there. The next I'm going to do is use inputs. So I'm using Unreal Engine's new input system, the enhanced input system. If you don't know how to do this, please just look it up. There's tutorials on it on YouTube. It's an Unreal thing. It's got nothing to do with Motion Symphony, so I'm not going to go over it here. I'm just going to drag in the input action move, which I've created. It's a 2D input, vector 2D input action based on WASD, basically. And when that triggers, we're just going to check first that our this is valid in this case, and we are going to take the value and we're going to call a function called move on the possessed character, which we don't yet have. So let's go back to our tutorial section, go to our BP tutorial character, and again I'll drag it over here, and I'm going to make a new function called move, and we're going to combine the movement of the character and the updating of the trajectory generator input into a single function. And we're going to take two inputs here. Let's make it two floats. So input X and input Y. And I'm passing them as separate variables because we're going to need them as separate variables for literally the next thing we're going to do. And we'll come back to this though. We're just going to finish the player controller first, and if that's valid, so we'll call move, and we can plug this in, or where is it? Action value split struct pin. There we go, X and Y. Okay, so we're calling move on the character. That's all we really need to do for now. Is there camera movement? Yeah, there is camera movement, but we're not going to worry about that just yet. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to make this input vector relative to our camera. There's a function for that comes with Motion Symphony, get vector relative to camera. We'll plug that in, and we'll plug in the X and the Y, and we can use our camera component. Do we have a camera component? I haven't set that up yet, so let's set that up. Okay, you know what? There's a few things actually I've missed. The mesh, we need to rotate this mesh 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees rather. It needs to face the same way as this arrow, because, I don't know, Unreal Epic decided that characters would have a different rotation axis. And we need to add a camera because we don't have a camera on this character, so let's add in a spring arm. And to this spring arm, we shall add a camera. If I can spell. Okay, we've got a camera on there. On the spring arm, let's make it 400 in arm length. And let's move this up. Not the rotation. move it up to like the shoulder level, and let's rotate it. Why doesn't it go negative? I'll just type it in. There we go, negative 30 degrees, negative 25 degrees. I'm going to turn on use pawn control rotation. That should be fine. And that should just about do it. If it doesn't, we'll come back to it. But that's good, fine for getting started. Okay, let's go back to our here. Now we can actually plug in our camera component. So that's all fine and dandy. Next we're going to do is add our movement input. This is to the character movement component. This is how you would normally move your character. So let's just, add movement input here. So instead of just calling add movement input in our player controller, all I'm doing is combining this and the next thing we're going to do into one function on the character, just to keep things tidy on the player controller. I'm going to plug that in. Next thing we want to do is we want to set the trajectory input on our trajectory generator. And again, this is why I've put this on a function to do these things both at the same time. So trajectory generator, set trajectory input. So this is the input vector. And we can go here. And what we want to do is we want to take this. I'm going to have to break it. And we're going to use the X and the Y axis here. Plug that into our set input trajectory. So that's pretty much it for that function. We can compile that and save it. So now we have our input. It's going into our character. That's going to move our character and set the trajectory input. Okay, we're just about done with the character for now. Let's leave that at that and go to our tutorial character. And pull it over here, our animation blueprint. We'll go to the event graph and we're going to start setting this up. Okay, so we need a begin play, and we're going to need to get that trajectory generator from the character. So let's grab that. So get owning actor. We will cast this to BP tutorial character. And I'm going to promote that to a variable. So let's rename this tutorial character, or just character. And from this, we are going to get component by class, and we're going to choose a trajectory generator component, and we're going to promote this to a variable. We can do an isValid check on it first. Actually, no, we can just set it straight to a variable. It doesn't matter if it's null. So let's promote it to a variable, and we'll rename this trajectory generator. Okay. Now we've got our trajectory generator component from our character. Now we can start doing other stuff with that. We're going to need to extract our trajectory from the trajectory generator, and there's a special way to do that. Now let's go to our blueprint update animation, and we're going to take our character. Actually, we're going to call a function called construct motion input feature array. Now, instead of extracting the trajectory directly, we call this function because our input response data that we made, remember this is the main input for the animation motion matching node, the input data, isn't necessarily always going to be a trajectory or just a trajectory. It could be other things, and therefore it needs this to handle all input responses. So this is a blueprint helper function I got that takes all the data required from all the necessary components, and it adds it to the input data. If you're interested, the input data is really just an array of floats. It's just a wrapper for that. So this helper function helps you fill that array of floats with the data that is required. We can chuck in our character as the actor, and we do need to plug in the motion config. So in this case, I'm just going to choose that. We probably could just go, we've already got it here. So where was it? Actually, I didn't set it as a variable, but that's fine. We'll just plug it in there. No, we will promote it to a variable actually, since we have with other things. So I'll call this motion config and we'll compile, and I'll just, it's already set that automatically. So we can plug that in. That will now fill our data in here. So we have, in summary, play controller does some input, that goes to the character, makes it relative to the camera, moves the character, sets the trajectory input on the trajectory generator, which we have set up already with the tutorial config. Might have to change some settings, but that's fine. We'll see what we get first. Then in our animation blueprint, we are extracting that trajectory, and then that goes into our motion matching node. So we've done the full cycle here. This should work. It's not going to be good. I'm warning you now. This is the most basic possible setup, and we haven't done any calibration or anything. But let's hit play and see what happens, hey? So I will need to actually change this. I'm gonna go and make a game mode so that I can switch this easily. So call this game mode base, and we'll call this BP tutorial game mode. And in this game mode, I will simply set all these starting things. Let's say player controller will tutorial player controller. The default pawn is tutorial character, and I think that's actually it. That's actually all there is. Okay, and I can go now to the world settings, change this to tutorial game mode, and we should be able to hit play. And here we have our character, but there's not a lot going on, and in fact, I can't even see a trajectory. So let's type in a.animnode. So I hit tilde there for the debugging here. Mosinf. I'm going to go to trajectory debug, and I'm going to put this to 2. And obviously no input is coming through because that green trajectory, there's nothing there. Don't worry about the character glitching around here. We're going to fix that soon. I'm doing this all from the most basic approach first for understanding, and then we're going to fix everything that goes wrong, because I guarantee you're going to come across these problems as we go. So I think I need to bind the input system, and I'm going to do that in the player controller, and on possess I'm also going to bind, so bind what's this called, enhanced input system. There we go, input world subsystem, so we need this. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to check, is it valid, and then we are going to add the mapping context, and we're going to select our mapping, which was the default. Again, if you don't know how to do this, look up tutorials. It's an Unreal thing, and I think that's all I pretty much need to do here. That should make it work. It's not working. Okay, sorry, my bad. I figured out the problem. So it was just this enhanced. There's different versions of this, and for some reason I was this local player subsystems, this one that doesn't have the input, was just coming out null and invalid, so I wouldn't set up. So you need to get the one for player controller input, this one here, and then plug in the self. At least that's what I had to do then, but it's got nothing to do with motion matching either way. Alright, so now that is set up, the basics, let's hit play, and we've already got our trajectory on here, and we can see the trajectory is at least working, but things are a bit funny here. I'm actually pressing D and A, so the left and right, and it's going forward and back, and my forward and back is going sideways, so that's a problem, and that's probably got to do with the character's rotation. I'm just going to go to our character, and in our move function, I'm just going to swap these around. There we go, just to fix that. Now, technically what you want to do is you need to apply the rotation of the model. Remember, the model is rotated -90, but because it happens to be exactly 90 degrees, just swapping these around has the same effect. So that should fix that. The other thing we really need to do just to get started is we need to turn on root motion. Now, I am doing a full root motion setup first because it is the easiest, and we're doing the easiest stuff first, and then we'll move on later. So let's go actually set that in the event graph in our begin play, just so that it's definitely set, and we can also change that at runtime then. So let's say set root motion mode and say root motion from everything. Hit save, compile, save, done, hit play. And now we have some animation. It's not turning for some reason and it looks horrible, and there's also no blending, and there's a reason for that. So let's go back into our animation blueprint and we will go to our animation graph and let's add in the blending. Now, motion matching uses inertial blending, and therefore you need an inertialization node. Inertialization, and this node just goes near the end of your animation graph, before any IK, but after any other pose blending. So now that that is there, we should get smooth animation. So let's go back, have a look. So the animation is smoother now, but I don't think turning is working still for some reason. Okay, so the character's not turning. It's a pretty easy fix, though it can be a bit annoying swimming through all these settings. So if we go to our pawn here and search pawn control rotation, it comes up here. Use controller rotation yaw. Uncheck that. We're using the root motion. We don't want to use the player controller. The other thing we want to uncheck is orient rotation to movement. No, we're going to rotate it ourselves. Hit compile, save, and then we should be able to turn, and our character turns and goes where we want. It's very unresponsive right now. Surprisingly not so bad since we just threw in all those animations, but like I can feel that it's not very responsive on my end, but it does look smooth, so that's a good start. There is a problem that you can see right now. I am not pressing anything and the trajectory is just staying all out, so we need to actually reset the trajectory. The reason that's happening is because in our player controller we are only updating the this here when there is nothing happening. So we need to actually reset this when there isn't anything going on. So we need to go to cancelled or completed and set this to 0. We'll need this as well. You know what, we're going to need this whole thing again. And we will plug that in and just set those to 0. So that when we have, let go of the input, we can go cancelled as well. We should do that uncancelled. All right, so let's go back and check if that fixed that. Yeah, that did fix that. So the trajectory is now going back to 0. Now we get things like this. The character is not responding as we want, as I said. That's fine. That's the stuff that we need to do to change calibration. But things are generally, the basic setup is working. We are getting animation, the trajectory is working, it's being extracted, etc. So let's do just a few things, not much. Okay, so the last thing I really want to do before we move on to the next tutorial, which we'll go and calibrate this so that it behaves a lot better, is I just want to fix this camera so that we can have a camera that works. This is nothing special, just go to the player controller, and I'm going to get the input action for look, and from here I'm going to get the possessed character and add controller your input, and we're also going to add pitch input to this as well. Add controller pitch input, and the yaw is going to be the X. Yes, that's correct, and that is going to be the Y, and we can make this all nice as you do. Also make sure, of course, that your boom arm, sorry, wrong character, your boom arm is got use pawn control rotation hooked up there, and that you inherit the pitch, yaw, and roll on your camera. Yeah, so that should give us the camera movement. There we go, and you can see the trajectory because we did that relative to camera thing. The trajectory is getting generated based on the input relative to the camera. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. You might be wondering, well, it's very unresponsive. That's fine. We're going to get towards that. We've set up the most basic system possible. We are going to start refining it next time. I mean, look at our animation blueprint. It is literally 2 nodes, and we're getting all that animation, but we're going to make it a whole lot better, and we're going to fix up the idle so that it's nice and crisp. So thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for the next tutorial. See you around.